Good day, everyone. Richard Cowperthwait for Northwest Access TV. Thanks for joining us as we get ever closer to the November 5th general election. And we're doing another show with candidates involved in contested races here in Franklin County. Only 3 such races, and this is one of them. And this is the Franklin-8 district, some of St. Albans City, some of St. Albans Town, the incumbent Republican running for re-election, Casey Toof, and challenger Zach Scheffler. And Casey, I guess we'll start with yourself. Give us some background. Easy decision to run for re-election, or
yeah, it was pretty easy. Yeah, and thank you for having me today. I really appreciate that. And thank Zach for coming out. This is always fun. The interviews in here. Yeah, it was pretty easy. I've been in the State House for 6 years, 3 terms. Basically, I decided to run because I have 2 kids who are 8 and 9. They're in St. Albans Town School. We have.
And I should note, you're a St. Albans Town resident. And Casey and Zach, you're a St. Albans City resident. And the district, again, wards 5 and 6 in the city and kind of southeastern part of St. Albans Town.
Yeah, if you look at it, it's like Route 7 and 89 in between there, south, and then, but it includes Hill Farm Estates.
Okay.
And so, I grew up in St. Albans City. I actually went to St. Albans City School. I went to BFA. And then I went to Castleton, where I got my degree in secondary education and history. And I came back to St. Albans after graduating, and I decided we wanted to live in St. Albans Town, and we raised a family, and I have 2 boys who, like I said, go to St. Albans Town School. And, fortunately for the first 4 years that I was in the State House, we didn't pass any new taxes or fees under Governor Scott's proposed budgets. But the last 2 years really have been a lot harder for Vermonters. I think we've passed $500 million in new taxes and fees in 2023. Last year we passed the property tax increase. Basically, I decided to run because I want my kids to be able to grow up here, thrive here, have more opportunities that I had when I was here. And I had a lot of opportunities here. We had great teachers, great coaches, great people that live in this community. But I want them to be able to experience that. But I also want them to come back and be able to afford to live here and be able to find a place to live and afford rent or afford a house. So that's kind of was the deciding factor.
Okay, and we'll get into issues. Affordability is certainly a huge one.
Yeah.
Zach, tell us about yourself. You're no stranger to Northwest Access TV. Thanks for dealing with me many times in the past.
Well, it's always a pleasure, Richard, and it's feels good to be on the other side of the camera.
Other side of the camera.
Quite different,
here.
Yeah. My parents got their start on South Main. My dad was working at the Sheldon paper mill. My mom raised me. Really? They saved, found a half-finished house out in Montgomery, right in the middle of the woods, and moved out there in my early years. But we always had a close connection with St. Albans. It's the center for commerce in the county, and I stayed in touch with friends and people, who were in my immediate and extended family here in St. Albans. Right now, I live in St. Albans City. My girlfriend and I, Alice, live there, and we're proud to call it our home. My brother has recently moved to St. Albans Town. He started his own business here, and my family has a business in St. Albans City. So more than any time, we're closer together, and it's in St. Albans. I grew up. I went to public school in Montgomery, but I also was homeschooled for a time. I went to CCV. I'm a proud CCV graduate, and later went on to Castleton State College to study communications.
So Castleton for both you guys.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And why I'm running, more than ever, seeing my brother find a home here in St. Albans, but also, and seeing the opportunity that comes with that, right? But also personally experiencing and seeing my friends personally experience struggles with paying for childcare, paying for housing, or even finding housing. And then just hearing from my neighbors and people who are close to me deal with housing and healthcare and finding an education and childcare for their kids. So that really spurred me to run. And also, I just really wanted to give folks in Franklin-8 a choice that was grounded in the idea that we have an optimistic future ahead of us if we take advantage of that, if we plan for it, and if we do the hard work to make it happen. I think it's one part of what we need to do is identify problems, but I also think that we need to talk about solutions to those problems. And I'm looking forward to having that conversation here today.
Very good. You're also chair of the Franklin County Democratic Committee, are you not?
Yeah, I chair the Franklin County Democratic Committee, and I also serve on our Municipal Energy Committee here in the St. Albans City, which is very interesting. Went to a talk yesterday about energy and transportation. So.
A little disappointed again. Franklin County is Republican dominated at this point. I'm sure you were hoping to have more Democratic candidates. I'm sure you gave that some effort. Disappointed that you didn't get more, or just hard to convince people? Is this a tough thing to convince people to run for office these days? Or?
Yeah, and I think across the state, the main challenge is the incumbency, right?
Yeah.
You see in St. Albans City, in the Franklin-8 race, trying to find a candidate to run against an entrenched incumbent is tough.
Right, and in Franklin County, all the incumbents, mostly Republicans, all incumbents are running for re-election. Wayne LaRush, is he running for re-election, or is he's been elected once? He had been appointed at some point.
Yeah, he's running
But
again. Yeah.
running again.
Yep.
And so he was elected 2 years ago?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I forgot when he was appointed. That was a little while before
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
like 3 years ago, I
So
think.
anyway, so you're dealing with all incumbents, all Republicans, except for Mike McCarthy.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it speaks a lot to the difficulty of this work. It's
Yeah.
no small task to ask someone to be a legislator, and I certainly had many conversations with people who were interested, but the barriers and the amount of work that a citizen legislature has to do and undertake as an individual, it's
Yeah.
daunting. So
Yeah.
that limits, certainly affects people's decisions one way or the other.
Right, and again, you guys don't get rich in Montpelier, Casey. What about 15,000? Am I pretty close?
Yeah, it's
And
around there.
You get your add-ons for like committee chairs and stuff?
Yeah, I think so. We get a stipend. It's like 800 something a week,
Yeah.
but it's only when we're there, and we're there for about 20 weeks.
Yeah.
We do get per diems for traveling or staying, and for food. But it's really like Zach said, it's really hard to I have to make a lot of sacrifices. 2 kids in daycare, they play 3 sports, and they overlap. Right now they're in hockey and soccer.
Yeah.
It's really hard to find people that can commit. Plus, if you coach, if you have on any other boards, or if you just like to not spend all your time driving 2 hours a day
Yeah.
to Montpelier, to and from Montpelier. So.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to find people that want to serve, and it is hard. I'm very fortunate. I have a flexible work schedule. I have a wife who is fantastic and picks up the pieces every chance she can get.
I should just the other, for folks checking in, not aware of what's going on around here. Again, the other 2 St. Albans House districts, Mike McCarthy, the one Democrat in the Franklin County Legislative Delegation running for re-election in Franklin-3, a rematch from 2 years ago against Republican Joe Luno, and Representative Lynn Dickinson, longtime Republican legislator and covering the rest of St. Albans down in Franklin-2, running unopposed for re-election. The only other contest in the county is the Enosburg-Montgomery district, incumbent Republican Alan Penny DeMore being challenged by Democrat progressive Heather Moore. So have some activity going on. Casey, you touched on it. What's most on voters' minds? You kind of touched on affordability and public safety. Are those top 2, or you tell me?
Those are the top 2, and you can see. I mean, if you just go on Facebook, you can see what's on people's minds. But affordability is the number one thing, and I think public safety is up there, depending on people's experiences and what they've seen. But affordability was probably the largest thing, that the most talked about thing whenever I go to a ball game, whenever I knock on someone's door, whenever I go pretty much anywhere. My wife doesn't let me go grocery shopping anymore because I spend more time talking
Really?
politics than picking out groceries. So the affordability, the issue is the fact that we have these large increases in property taxes, 15.5% in St. Albans City, 13.1% in St. Albans Town. And unfortunately, we knew that this was coming down in December of last year. And to give you a timeline of it, it was like the December 1st letter by statute has to be sent out by the tax commissioner under the governor's administration, and they warned that it was going to be about a 20%
You're
increase.
talking 20% or so.
And so when that came through, leadership in the House and Senate were like, oh no, this is just, like they said, this is fear mongering, it's not going to get that. Well, as time went on, we started realizing school budgets were up about $243 million. And so that was really concerning to us because we're like, boy, that's a 20% increase in our property taxes. How are we going to afford this? So we passed a few laws that would have allowed school districts to change votes, change their budgets, give them more time. But in the end, we were stuck with about an 18% increase. And what happened in the House and Senate was we lowered it down to 13.8% across the state. But by doing so, what they call raising new revenue or finding creative ways to fund this. Basically, we just raised new taxes on Vermonters and working Vermonters, which I found to be really irresponsible. So you're just taking money out of a different pot to feed it down. And unfortunately, next year, we're looking at, if no school spending increases, we're still looking at about a 7% increase in property taxes if nothing is done. And unfortunately, last year, we saw an 8.5% increase. This year, we saw a 13.8% increase. And next year, we're looking at even probably another double-digit increase. And that's really forcing, when I talk to people indoors, they're like, well, when my kid's out of here, when I retire, like they're looking to move away because of these burdens.
So any magical, Republicans have certainly criticized big time the Democratic supermajority.
Yeah,
and then Governor Scott obviously too.
So
any magical solutions?
Yeah, so the governor came in with a proposal at the end of the session. He said, "I'm going to veto this, and here's some proposals." And I'm in leadership, so if you don't know, I'm the assistant minority leader in the House. And
also, I should note, campaign manager for Lieutenant Governor candidate John Rogers.
John Rogers, yeah. So my consulting firm is in charge of his campaign, which is going pretty well right now. But I forgot where I was at, but.
I was just saying salute. I've heard plenty of criticism from Republicans about the Democratic supermajority.
Yeah, and so when the governor came in, he proposed a number of things. And being in leadership, I was involved in a lot of these talks, and we had some solutions. There were a few, making a cap on what property taxes can go up, per pupil size in classrooms. There was a bunch of big asks that would be really tough. Some of it would be tough to do, but he didn't expect to get all of his suggestions passed, but they basically were like, no, we're going to go with our plan, and their plan was basically raise new revenues, raise new taxes, set the yield rate at 13.8%, and we'll deal with it with this task force that we put together, and the task force may take 2 or 3 years to finish up. Who knows how long to implement that? So we don't have any changes coming to education for who knows, maybe 5 years. And stuff needs to happen now because people are really, there's a lot of pressure on them. And so when they say, and another argument they make is, well, if the governor had his way, it would have gone up 30%. That's a fallacy. That's not true. If there was no yield, it probably would have gone up 30%. But the reason for his veto was to work on it to get it lower. It wasn't to set the rate at 30%. And so I just want to make that clear that there were solutions on the board, but nobody really wanted to listen to them in the supermajority because they really didn't have to.
Good. Zach, what's on, I suspect, the same issues? You tell me, when you're campaigning, what are you hearing most from voters out there?
Yeah, obviously part of it is community safety. Obviously it is affordability, and specifically concern about property taxes. And there's another piece that comes in. Property taxes is usually paired with something else that is on folks' minds. And it's a general concern that that Vermont doesn't have a place for them. And what factors in to that, and what people express to me is kind of a dismay, a despair that things don't seem to be working as well as they should. And when I say things, I mean, the state of Vermont. And people reminisce about all the things that we all love and enjoy and take for granted, and we count as freedoms in this state. I support public education. I think that's deeply foundational to our freedoms here in Vermont. Housing for people who they see in their communities of any age and of any stage of life, right? People think about jobs and opportunities for young people in those concerns, and I would just kind of group all of those things together as people are concerned about opportunities for Vermonters of all ages and of all paths in life. So I would say the community safety, affordability, specifically property taxes, but then just a deep desire to see things work again, and to see a state government that helps people get back on their feet, that gives opportunity to folks to take advantage of all the things that we love about Vermont. So I think people want things working again, is how I feel about that.
I'm sure they do. Again, mention the criticism the Republicans and the governor have leveled at the Democratic supermajority. Unfair, I can only assume you're not buying all or some of that criticism, but what would you say in response, especially the sustainability with property taxes up 13 to 15%? I mean, I think a lot of folks would say, I mean, sounds like it might be pretty unsustainable. What do you say? Can you say anything, magical solutions, or make people feel better about that? Or what do you say to those folks?
Well, thinking about property taxes specifically, there's been a lot of back and forth on this. And while it's easy to say, like, the rates were brought down as low and as responsibly as possible, that's little comfort to folks who are still dealing with this. I'd also say that one thing people are surprised by is news of the expanded property tax credit, which did income adjust some of those increases for folks.
Yeah, that doesn't always get a lot of attention.
Yeah, and 75% of Vermont homeowners are covered by this, and anybody making less than $130,000 or around $130,000 a year, a single person, can get up to $8,000 in property tax credits, or at least that's what I recall from what I looked at. And I want to say that again, the property tax discussion is a place where people are feeling apprehensive, they're feeling a little scared, but the fact that when you tell them about the expanded property tax credit, oftentimes I'm telling folks about this for the first time. They read what they see on Facebook, they see a lot of problems, they don't see a lot of solutions, and they don't feel like anybody is throwing them a lifeline at a time when they're more, when they're feeling a bit of despair about the future of Vermont. So I think it's important, again, going back to that solutions piece, it's important to identify the problem. Property tax increases are unacceptable. It's also important to talk about the solutions. The governor proposed, part of what I recall of his proposal, at least early on or at the end of the session, was taking out a giant loan to, pay for some of these, to bring down some of these costs. That would have, some folks like the state treasurer Pichek described that as a payday loan to bring down those costs, which would have hurt Vermont in the long run, and at the time stated that would have affected our credit rating and such. So there are those points, and the governor came out and responded to those points, but that was only recently, right? Would have helped to have that information, that honest information, that good information at the time. So there is, these are deeply complicated systems. No one is arguing that they aren't. They're deeply complicated because we believe in funding public education in Vermont as equitably as possible. And part of that is making sure that schools in poor communities, lower income communities, have some of the same opportunities and advantages for students that wealthy communities do. That's the reason. So, and I just want to answer your question specifically. These are complicated situations. Every county has a different educational situation going on. And so we have done, or the legislature has done, a lot of studies and has a lot of data. And what's great about that is you can take those studies, evaluate that data, and make the best possible decisions, county by county and school district by school district, as possible. That's what the Committee on Education is going to do. And it's really important work to do right.
Okay, so just on the property tax credit, are there a lot of people who don't take advantage of that, or?
Zach said it himself, 75% of Vermonters are eligible for it and utilize it, so it's
Are eligible and using?
I don't know if they use it, or I know 75% of property tax payers are eligible.
Of course, I hear occasional people saying that's too generous, that the state is being too generous with that.
And I think if you think about it, if 3/4 of the people aren't paying what they should be paying towards education, it also just falls on those other 25%, and that has other ways to, if you're paying that, then you're going to pay more if you expand it, because that was one of the solutions. I think the solution isn't to give more and get more. We need to make structural changes to the education finance system. The fact is we spend $2.4 billion to educate only 80,000 students.
And of course, enrollment's been going down as costs keep going up.
Yeah, and we've lost students, we've lost population, and the reason is there's many factors for it, but we spend $2.4 billion to educate 80,000 students, and to respond to the property, one of the solutions for the governor said would have affected our bond rating, our credit rating. They already look at our tax burdens and high cost of living in the state. That is part of their solutions. We've already saw our bond rating lower in the last couple of years while I've been in office, due to the handling of our pension funds and how we have been handling those for the last 20 years. And this is beyond what we're capable of doing right now. This is not, I'm not pointing the fingers at anyone here. This is just the handling of it for the last 20 years, and there's been many legislators within that time. So,
And the pension funds were getting a lot of attention a few years ago, and I think I heard the treasurer talk about that the other day on radio. Is a pension system? I was hearing a whole of billions of dollars in that.
Yeah,
has that been corrected pretty much?
It has. I don't want to say it's been resolved, because I think we still have to keep looking at it, and it's something that we have to be keeping an eye on. We've put the investments in that we should. The promise was made. The promise should be kept, and the last thing we want to do is to see our pension system fail. And so that was something that was 2 years ago or 4 years ago, whenever we were talking about that. That was the biggest thing that we had to focus on, and I think we did a good job at working on it, but we have to still keep an eye on it.
Zach, does that issue come up? Pensions? Probably not a top issue. Anybody ask you about that? That was a big issue a few years ago.
It hasn't come up at the doors.
Yeah, not at the door. Another, while I'm thinking of billions of dollars, isn't there the pent-up demand for school construction, back to an education issue? Isn't that in the billions? Probably, or am
I want to
crazy
say
about that?
the report we got from AOE this year was, in order, and this would be if we started back in January when they presented this, was we have a need for school construction.
And the state, of course, used to, I've been around here forever.
Yep.
I think, didn't the state used to pick up 75% of that or something?
Yeah, and in 2000, around the recession in 2007, 2008, or 2009, one of those years, we put a moratorium on the state funding and helping with the school construction.
The state is not
It's still there, and it's really tough corrections. The reason why it's tough is because the report we got back was it would cost us $500 million a year for 21 years.
Wow.
That's if we started back in January.
Really?
And I think that did factor in inflation. So it is a big price tag. So what this task force in the Ed committee is going to be looking at, and what they are looking at, is what the future of schools look like. Consolidation, how schools can share resources, and also how we can save on school construction. Because when we see school construction, it's not like everyone needs a new school, but you might need a new roof here that costs $10 million, or you might need a new driveway or parking lot, or they might need a new gym, or they might need to update PCBs is another thing. They might need to update their windows and structures inside.
In fact, the big issue, Newport comes right to mind with some of the kids still in tents, I think, as we speak.
Yeah, and that came out right towards the end. They don't have a place. They're out in the lawn on a tent. They're not in the classroom. It's really detrimental to their learning experience, and that's something we should really look at.
Yeah, education funding. I'm sure that, again, it just if you folks can tell me how the education funding system works, I'd be real impressed. But it just sounds like it's incredibly complicated and convoluted. That issue comes up, I assume.
People ask questions about it. I think it's just generally something people talk about, public discourse, right? And I think again, it's complicated for a reason. This is so that schools in areas where the community can't support the school and their children's education to the fullest extent, in the same way that wealthier areas in the state can. The school funding was intended to lift schools up so that every child has a quality education, a quality public education. And I think just the discussion about the costs of all these things, we're hearing numbers, we're hearing talk of increases, and we're hearing talk about the costs of the rebuilding schools. This is a long-term project for Vermont. People are our most precious resource, and students and kids are among the most precious simply because they're our future, right? They're going to be bringing our state forward into the future long after we're all gone, right? And so that's why it's important to, yes, identify the costs, but it's also important to have a plan on how to roll out projects to meet, the needs of the people and to handle those costs. If we have an immense amount of capital costs, we need to have a solid plan to chip away and work at on a long-term basis, and in a way that makes sense for each community over time. Obviously, no one's suggesting we do all of this in every way immediately, but it's important to have a plan. And I would say that, talking about school construction, we need to have this conversation, and the task force, the Committee on Education is going to be doing this. They're going to be talking about, county by county, how we roll out these changes to our education system, and that might involve building different types of schools or in different places. It might not mean necessarily in every community in Vermont that we're going to be rebuilding the same schools or rebuilding the same buildings. It could mean a lot of different things that are unique to every community, and you need to have a steady hand to build the plan to do that on a long-term basis.
Republicans have also made plenty of hay over the clean heat standard issue. Okay, I've got an ad in front of me from Paid For by Vermonters for Affordable Heat. Lawmakers in Montpelier will decide in January whether to pass a clean heat fee to pay for the program. They haven't told us what the clean heat fee will be, but the best guess is 70 cents per gallon. You hear a lot of numbers, but again, where's that? And I guess I'm hearing some Democrats who voted for that are getting pretty concerned about these projected numbers. I don't think they're real hard numbers. But
Yeah, as they should. This for me is something that's really going to hurt Vermonters, specifically rural Vermonters that still heat with oil or propane or any kind of fuel like that. When this bill passed the House, it left the House without a check back. And what I mean a check back is in January, we're actually going to vote on this bill. An independent consultant came and just did a test, or they ran the numbers and what it's going to cost. This could cost upwards of $7 a gallon to heat someone's house in the wintertime.
Those numbers seem to be very much disputed, but anyway.
It was
That was from a consultant.
It was an independent consultant that did it. It did not come from the governor. It did not come from the PUC. It was an independent contractor that came in and did that. But when the Julie Moore, the Secretary of Natural Resources, came out and initially said it could be 70 cents a gallon. Well, she was wrong. It could be around 7. So it could be 70 cents to $7 a gallon. And I won't vote for anything that brings it up even 1 cent, because I think that Vermonters are already paying too much for everything else. Groceries are up. We also passed a renewable energy standard that is increasing our electric rates by $1 billion. So I think we're looking at every single time that someone goes to pay a bill, they find out they have to pay a little bit more, and
So
they're taking home a little bit less in their
The
paycheck.
Public Utilities Commission has been looking at this, but
Yeah, they're responsible for implementing this, I believe.
so the vote in January will be what exactly?
To be if we fully implement
If you
the
fully
clean heat
implement
standard.
that.
So when it passed the House, it didn't have that check back. A lot of pressure was put on by the governor and Republicans in the Senate, and there was about 11 people that were like on the fence if they're going to support it or not. That's the number that can sustain a governor's veto. It went 10 no, well, it's 20 to 10, so it did pass with the full veto proof. But it has that check back, so when it depends on who we elect in November this year, who's going to vote on that next year to implement that.
And I think, aren't I hearing that some Democrats who voted for that?
Some Democrats, Senator Chittenden already put a really big statement out.
Yeah.
And there were a couple others that said, and even I've heard like in lieutenant governors, like people won't, if it has a $10 billion price tag, I don't
Yeah.
think that they will vote for that. And I'm hopeful for that too.
Zach, thoughts on clean heat standard, that issue?
Yeah, it's an important issue, right? I remember growing up, my parents had, propane that they, we had the submarine out back, right?
Yeah.
And we had to supplement with wood heat because the cost of propane would spike or fluctuate. And that did real harm to, the ability for my mom and dad to, calculate costs, budget costs. I want to pull back the discussion a bit and say that the reason why we're having this conversation is because in years past and years recently, we've seen fossil fuels spike, 200% increases, if I remember correctly, on fossil fuels to heat homes. Absolutely unsustainable and unpredictable, right? And what's interesting about, some of the alternative energy sources to heat a home, drive a car, all these things, is that oftentimes they're cheaper, right? And I'll just say that, I wish back in the day my parents had more home heating options that would have saved them money, right? And so being at a talk with, Efficiency Vermont, being at a talk with, Green Mountain Power, being at a talk with Vermont Gas last night, oftentimes you can lower your energy and heating bills with these new options. They're just, alternatives that you can look in to heat your home or, get you to work, that kind of thing. I deeply support a clean climate, right? Clean water and clean air is so important. My dad was a fisherman. We'd go out in the woods in Montgomery and, enjoy Vermont for all of its natural beauties. And I'd wish that for anybody in the state and even beyond. So again, when we talk about this, clean heat standard or, and the renewable energy stuff, an important part to remember is one part, that these things do help. They reduce carbon, they help the environment. They also, in many cases, lower costs, right? And so when you ask about the CHA and the renewable heat standard, this is, again, we're talking about numbers. We're hearing a lot of numbers, 70 cents here, dollars numbers here. The CHA is a study to build a plan forward to make clean energy more available, more efficient, and more readily, doable in the state of Vermont. Those checkbacks you talk about are important because we reevaluate those plans. The numbers that are being talked about right now, to my understanding, are numbers from a report that asked for the Cadillac plan. What if we, got every Vermonter using, non-fossil fuel heating and energy right now? What would that cost? Obviously, the cost is going to be big. But again, the importance of planning and not just, raising a ruckus about specific numbers. The importance of the plan is that you spread out these costs. You build forward. You pick what you can do, what's most immediately actionable, and you work with that. So I think it's really important to remember that. Number one, that it's important to care about our environment. Number two, that oftentimes these clean energy options, which are options, cost less and are more predictable than their fossil fuel counterparts. And who doesn't want more freedom of choice, especially in a market where you can see your fossil fuel heating costs spike based on geopolitical events that nobody in the United States, nobody in Vermont certainly, can control. So it's I think it gets Vermont on a path of energy resilience and independence that's really important.
That sounds like your message is people should keep an open mind about this issue.
Yes, follow the work, follow the news, make sure you follow the facts, most importantly, honest information in this day and age. The world is very complicated. You need honest information to navigate it, and that's deeply important. And some of the discourse out there, quite frankly, doesn't meet that honest information standard.
I'm sorry, Kay, you want to?
Yeah, can I just jump in on that? When he says it's not a study, it wasn't a study when it came out of the House. So all the people in the House that voted for that, it wasn't a study. It would have been fully implemented. Unless, that's why we have the process. It went to the Senate, and they made it a study.
They made it a study.
So it won't be a study in January, because that's when we make the vote on if we're going to implement it. And when we say cheaper rates, or a cheaper way to do it, we just raised electric rates by $1 billion over the next 10 years. So that means that my electric rate, so if my option is to put in a $7,000 heat pump on 3 different levels of my house, that's going to cost me $21,000. Plus my electric rates will be going up. I don't think that's a cheaper option for me or my family. Specifically, if my other option, it may be cheaper if my other option is paying $7 a gallon for heating fuel. I think that's really important. The numbers are really important to remember. And that's just, and we do. I mean, what's our number one industry in the state of Vermont? It's tourism, and we need to make sure we have clean lakes. We need to make sure we have clean mountaintops, and we have a green Vermont. And the fact is, the governor has invested more in his budgets in the last 8 years, I guess. He's invested more into climate change bills than any other governor in the history of the state of Vermont.
Richard, do you mind if I
just
jump in?
quickly, there are plenty of other issues,
It's important to remember, this is a study. We're going to check back. We're going to reevaluate. I think that's deeply important to remember. And I also want to note that, and again, at this conversation we had with Green Mountain Power and Efficiency Vermont, the cost savings from these alternative energy sources are notable. And they're also combined with a lot of rebates and incentives that lower those initial investment costs. So outfitting your home, a number of heat pumps in a home, free energy or low-cost energy audits, you get the right equipment at the right time, and you're lowering those top-line costs. So I think it's important to remember that there are a lot of incentives here because the state of Vermont is, hoping to give people the freedom of choice to heat their homes and to get to work at a lower cost. You're lowering those costs on an ongoing long-term basis. I think that's really important to remember.
Got about 25 minutes left. Have you got a question for your opponent, Casey?
Yeah, thanks. And Zach, I do appreciate it. I just want to know, would you have supported the governor to sustain his veto on the yield bill?
The yield bill
The
specifically.
yield bill specifically, would you have voted with the supermajority, your party, to override his veto, or would you have voted to sustain his veto so that we wouldn't have that? We could have had more discussion to lower property taxes.
I think that it's an important question to have, to talk to people in my district, right? I know that folks in the MRUSD district voted to fund their school, right? They voted yes on their school budget, right? And it's the legislature's duty, it's just the duty of the legislator to find the funds to fund those schools, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel that given the alternatives, either taking out a large loan and effectively lowering our credit rating, making it harder to borrow money to get stuff done in Vermont in the future, combined with the school vote or the school budget vote, and then also the alternative to the yes vote being the no vote. Like, what's the consequence of that no vote? You would have seen property taxes increase with a no vote. If the legislators who voted no had their way, right? Let's just step into this world for a moment. People could potentially be seeing higher property tax rates right now, and that would have been insufferable and unsustainable. So, given that the people voted for the school budget, I would vote to uphold the people's vote for their school and their vote for students.
Zach, have you got a question for Casey?
Yeah. I do. And first, thanks for being here and sitting down. I like how we're both, I'm going to talk a little bit at Castleton State College after this is all done. But yeah, so there's, again, my question for you is, the governor has talked a lot about, lowering budgets and all these things, right? Reducing the taxes on Vermonters, cutting taxes. No new taxes. Taxes are a big part of the conversation these days. And when you lower taxes, right, you lower funding for things that many Vermonters count on. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we're talking about, or if we're asking folks questions like, how are you going to pay for it? I'd like to return a question to you. And if you could give us a line item of things that you would want to cut to reduce those taxes, what specifically would you want to cut to lower those taxes in Vermont?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. You got to look at the overall budget. We spend $8.4 billion in a state that only has 643,000 people. Mm-hmm. We have the same budget as New Hampshire, and they have twice as many people.
Is that right? New
Hampshire has around the same
somebody
budget.
on radio claimed that Vermont's budget was twice as big as New Hampshire, which I knew was crazy. But New Hampshire has about the same.
I think it's around the same budget.
You're right.
I'd have to double check that.
Twice as many people.
And they have twice as many people. But right off, if you want to talk cutting, I would cut that 20% increase in DMV fees that was passed last year. I think that was one of the most regressive taxes that we could have seen. Not only does it affect people that don't have if I'm paying $90 for my truck registration, that's a little bit different than if I made $10,000 a year, who are also paying $90 for that truck registration. But businesses that have to register vehicles at like $500, $1,000, they're paying more, and that actually falls down to the consumer, which then again whenever we create a new tax or fee, it creates inflation. So that would be the first one that I would do. I would also look at some of the things that we did in. I mean, line item by line item, an $8.6 billion, or did I say 8.4? 8.6 billion, I believe is what it is.
8.6.
Go line by line would be very difficult. It takes them about 4 hours just to present the bill to us on the floor, so it's pretty big. But there is stuff in government that you could look at cutting, making more efficient. not being on the appropriations committee, I can't tell you specifically, but the DMV fee increase would be one of the biggest ones that I would cut. It's about $22 million. What I would also cut would be, I would cut the tax on military pensions and Social Security. That's something that we've tried to do the last 6 years that I've been in there. There's been no appetite to go after this. They went up, I think, with military pensions. They went up.
Didn't you
Yeah.
do
The first-
something on Social
It's
Security?
like $10,000 is the first $10,000 is
Are there
exempt.
not many other states that tax Social Security
So
and military?
I believe there's about we're one of 3 states that still tax military pensions and
Mm.
Social Security. And so that would be a big cut. And especially when you look at a state where that wouldn't really cost us that much money. I think they said the military pension cut would be around the same as the legislative pay that they wanted to double for us. They wanted to double our legislative pay, and it would cost about the same. And so I would cut those two taxes would be right off the military pension, Social Security taxes, and I would cut the 20% increase in DMV fees.
Do you mind if I offer a point of
I was gonna
clarification?
say- Yeah, okay.
I'm so sorry if I misspoke, but what services would you cut to draw down those taxes? That's what I'm talking about specifically. You talked about all those taxes that you would have cut, right? But the services that are funded by taxes in Vermont, what services, departments
I'm
or
not talking
positions
about
would
specific positions. Like I said, $8.6 billion. It would be ridiculous to try to say, I'm going to cut this, this, and this. But there are savings within those departments. We've seen where they, like Governor Scott this year, the state government only grew by, I think, 3.75% or 3.57%. We can make efficiencies within those. I'm not talking about cutting specific services. There are services we need to expand on. If you just take a look at our mental health services and our substance abuse services that are needed in the state, that's some investments we need to make. But we spent $8.6 billion. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem in the state. And I'm quoting Representative Scott Beck, who said that in a debate one day.
I think I've heard the governor say that.
And the governor said it as well, but we have a spending problem. We spend too much and we ask too much of Vermonters. So, yeah, so when you talk about tax cuts, DMV fee increase, Social Security, and military pension taxes.
So no service cuts,
I
no position cuts, no cuts in agencies and assistance for Vermonters going forward?
I mean, when you're looking at that, you can't say no positions will get cut if you start cutting that. But you have to find efficiencies in the state, and we owe that to the taxpayers. We're spending way too much. We have we have one of the highest tax burdens in the country, and that's because of the work that the legislature has done. We've increased school spending by $1 billion in the same time we've lost 14,000 students. So that's where we're talking about where can we find these efficiencies.
Zach, what about yourself? You ask a good question about are there areas to cut? Are there areas in state government in the budget to cut? Any places come right to mind? Is it possible to actually reduce that budget or some parts of that budget?
I think what we're talking about is good governance, right? I think good governance, for example, means appointing a Secretary of Education who's has a hands-on approach to education in the state.
I assume you weren't happy with the governor after the legislature did not confirm with Zoe Saunders. I assume you're unhappy that the governor made her a long-time interim secretary.
I think the legislature raised some really big concerns about the future of education headed by Ms. Saunders, but.
A couple legislators went to court with that and were unsuccessful.
Yeah, I think good governance, again, getting back to what I said earlier about folks at the doors want their government to work for them. They don't want folks throwing sand in the gears of our state government. They want to grease it up and get it working again, right? So good governance means having agency heads, for example, who are taking an active role in, the hiring, the operations of their agency, and leaving an agency position vacant for so long is not helping our education system, for example. So I support an agency of education that's efficient and effective and collaborative and works with our student supervisory unions. That's really important. That's good governance. That's basic. But I also want to talk a little bit about something. We can talk about efficiencies. I think everybody wants efficiencies in government. I think everybody wants good governance, right? But I just want to also remind folks that Vermont is going through a lot of different crises right now. We're dealing with housing and homelessness. Vermont's underbuilt for a very long time, and folks of all sorts of different ages and walks of life can't find and keep their home, right? So we're having this discussion about building housing in Vermont, the legislature found ways to do that, right? We're facing a mental health crisis, like Representative Toof said. We're facing an education issue, and we're facing some affordability questions. These are all things that are hitting us at one time, straight after a pandemic, which really brought the state into a position it hadn't found itself before. So what I am really interested in exploring as a legislature, in the legislature, is the question of balancing our tax system, right? One good point of news is that Vermonters, the wealthiest Vermonters, right, they're doing really well. The wealthiest Vermonters have seen their incomes go up and skyrocket. And relative to the rest of us, who haven't seen that, our middle income folks, for example, haven't seen those same increases. So at a time when we're beset by a lot of crises, the idea of cutting services and leaving people to fend for themselves, I think, is unacceptable. And I think that going forward, we can find ways to balance our tax system so that our homeowners are less responsible for funding the education system by themselves, and maybe move to something that's more of an income-based model that takes into account our middle income earners, the people who pay the bills and do the work in Vermont. I think we need to, we ask a lot from those folks. I think paying taxes is one of the most patriotic things we can do in America because we're caring about our neighbors. We're funding the things that get us to work and pay for our kids' education and childcare. And I think we need to ask less, just for this moment, of our middle income earners and unite neighbors across income spectrum to help Vermont get through this incredibly tough time. I think we can do that responsibly, and I think we can do that in a way that gets us through this really rough patch in a critical time.
Down to about 30, you want to,
Yeah,
and down to about 13 minutes is,
Okay.
try to be a little more concise. I got a few more
Yeah,
issues.
the issue with that, we already have a system based on income. When you say 75% of Vermonters don't pay or can utilize the tax credit. So it already is kind of based on income. The problem with Vermont is we don't have billionaires just sitting around everywhere. And a lot of people will live here they'll live in Florida for 181 days and they won't be here, so they don't qualify that'll be a second home. But there are some places that we can make some changes on that, and there has been a talk about going to an income tax instead of using the property tax. It's something, if they can prove to me it'll be a better system, it'll be cheaper for my neighbors in St. Albans, I will look to explore any of that stuff. Problem is with the state of Vermont in education, we've done 38 different studies over the last 20 years, and we haven't really implemented much and done much change, and we've seen the status quo through how we fund our education system.
Healthcare costs, and another huge issue.
Yeah.
And I got the Chronicle, a very good weekly paper out of Barden.
Yep.
And the folks in Newport, you're probably familiar with us, are pretty much freaking out right now. I guess this was a consultant to the Green Mountain Care Board.
Yeah.
And just, I guess I mentioned a few of the state's community hospitals, and the reference to North Country Hospital in Newport was, hey, it's just not working, scale it down to maybe a mental health. So the folks in Newport are freaking out. My question is, and I didn't see that report, Northwestern Medical Center, is there a concern about the future of NMC here in St. Albans?
I didn't see that in the report, but
Yeah.
I would be concerned I bet all of us would be concerned if there was an issue with the future of NMC. They provide a lot of care. My wife's in healthcare. She runs a medical office, and they provide a lot of these smaller places provide a lot of good healthcare to Vermonters around the state. And this is something, it's not really the healthcare is a really, you think education financing is really convoluted.
You've been on
I'm on ed for 6
committee.
years, and usually you stay in your expertise, but I live in a house has a lot of healthcare talk in it and how things are run, and I think there is an issue. This is not an issue we saw when we tried to go to single payer under Governor Shumlin. It didn't really work. This is something we need to get with the federal government has to help on, because it's such a huge drain on our budget.
Yeah, Zach, huge issue. Any quick thoughts on health? Sure you have thoughts, but
Yeah.
a minute or so?
I have firsthand, experience with how complicated healthcare can be. I was a volunteer first responder for a number of years in high school and in college. And you meet people who are oftentimes at their lowest point. I mean, they're in crisis. You're showing up on their doorstep. I remember most vividly, I still think about it, a man who had trouble regulating his insulin. And we would often find him, because number one, insulin was very expensive, and administering it was difficult for him because of some mobility issues he had. And finding my neighbor in a diabetic coma late at night is one of the most shocking things. We were there to help, and that was really important. People need help. People need healthcare help. Talking about federal action to lower healthcare costs, lowering the cost of insulin down to $35 is deeply important. Democrats are doing that. And I know that depending on how this election season goes at the federal level, I think that I'm optimistic that we're going to see more of that when Harris Waltz are elected. Healthcare is a big national issue. Health insurance specifically is a huge issue. So when you talk about questions about NMC, I've personally chatted with the leadership there. They're not too worried about healthcare costs at NMC because they're doing a lot of the things that more hospitals across the state are trying to figure out how to do. A lot of that's partnerships with UVM. Administering costs locally or administrating care locally that they can, and then diverting people to places they need to. The report, I encourage anybody to read it. It's fascinating. As a former first responder, the talk of what of organizing our first response services in this state was really personally fascinating to me. The report is interesting, and I think the healthcare, how we administer healthcare, how we provide healthcare, it's going to look a lot different in the state, and it's going to be more diversified. You're going to see a lot more preventative care, and it has the potential to look very different. Obviously, it's going to take the national, the federal and the state government working together to fix this problem. I don't think either of us sitting at this table going down to Montpelier is going to change the world. But at the same time, deeply committed to healthcare, lowering healthcare costs. I fully support any actions that could be taken, whether it's from improving administration or lowering the core costs. Absolutely.
Okay. Down to about just a little over 7 minutes at this point. I think I asked you, the legislative candidates 2 years ago, the same question. The homeless issue, unhoused issue, and it sounds like the legislatures really struggle with that.
Yeah.
Because I think I asked the same question 2 years ago. Should that be a state responsibility, Casey? Should the legislature, should the state do whatever it needs to do to deal with those folks?
I think the state should help the communities that are struggling with it, and I think that's a really big issue.
St. Albans certainly being one of them.
Yeah, in St. Albans, they're being proactive. I have council members reaching out to me, talking to me about things we can do at a state level. But I think when Zach talked earlier about housing. How do you solve all these complex issues that we're talking about here? I think housing solves a lot of them. It lowers our property taxes by adding more houses to the grand list. It helps with the homeless and the unhoused population. It helps with the affordability issue because people can, if the more houses you have on the market, the cheaper they will be, the more available rental properties. So I think that's where we come in as a state, is we not only help with the program that we have set up and where we can make efficiencies in it and where we can expand it and help communities out that are really suffering, but also it will help Vermonters out if we can build more housing in the state.
And the figure right here, I mean, some of these figures are, don't I hear like 35 to 45,000 new housing units ideally needed in the state?
I've heard up to like 65,000 houses needed. That's from the Vermont Chamber, I think, presented that to us. Like, if you want to solve all your problems, build 65,000 new homes, and it's tough. That's a tough ask. But
pretty tough. Zach, any quick comment on homeless issue? Another huge issue, another huge crisis, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, this touches on housing, which, as we all know, is like deeply foundational. I think two issues that have massive ripple effects in the state are housing and healthcare, right? I just hear stories, thinking about folks without homes. I really want to I think it's important to kind of talk about some of the different kinds of folks who are struggling with housing, right? I was walking up on Parsons Avenue, walked up to a really nice house, chatted with a friend of mine, and he had a buddy who works for Global Foundries. House burned down, can't find a new home, so he's couch surfing at my friend's house. he is working at Global Foundries, has a good job, and is technically homeless. You have folks who are tenting out outside of, our industrial centers because they have jobs there, and they can't find a place to live. They have a full-time job. They can't take showers in the morning to get to work. You have folks who struggle with, yes, mental health, issues. That's a real thing, and it really is prohibitive for them to find housing because of those barriers. I think of a, person around the neighborhood, Mark, right? He has difficulties, but thanks to, the housing that he has, Mark wouldn't be able to, keep a home by himself, but he has those tools and those connections and that assistance to keep a roof over his head. I think about my neighbors who
Just need to move on pretty quickly.
yeah, I think about my neighbors who are dealing with incredibly tough housing situations and have to stick in them because there's a lack of housing. I fully support, I think a bit of a difference at this table is support initiatives that occurred at the last session. Fully support reviewing Act 250. I wouldn't have voted against Act 250 reforms, and I think I'm unique in this table in declaring that. Because we simply need to build more housing. At the end of the day, we need to build more housing, more different types of housing in places that make sense, where our infrastructure is already ready for it. And that's where we need to prioritize.
Yeah. Act 250 comes up every
Yeah,
again,
and-
we're down to just a couple minutes.
Couple minutes, I'll try to make it quick. The problem that I had with that, it really focused on just the downtown centers, and it kind of left our rural Vermont kind of almost, you have to be really, really rich to be able to afford to go through the permitting process on there. The problem with our downtown centers is we need to focus on the infrastructure in those. Wastewater is a big issue. We see a lot of wastewater dumped from all of our major municipalities. They end up in the lake. If we're going to include more building in those areas, we need to invest in that infrastructure as well, because that's where we need to keep Vermont green. So I just keep it short.
Yeah, thank you. I'm struck, and again, just one more minute before I give you a closing statement. Dairy, I'm struck. Franklin County is still, I think, the biggest ag county in New England, biggest dairy county.
Yeah.
I just seem to hear nothing about dairy. I think number of dairy farms in Franklin County, I think under 100, statewide about 500, although milk production stays pretty stable.
Yeah.
But does dairy get any attention these days?
No, they actually took it out of agriculture, where they renamed the committee something.
No, really?
But the problem is we don't have any dairy farmers left in the State House. There's no representatives that are dairy farming.
No more Francis Horrigans hanging
No,
around?
the last one was Rodney Graham. I think he didn't run for re-election this year.
Wow.
And
So
that's-
literally no more dairy farmers there.
No, and unless I haven't seen the slate of candidates and what their professions are, but that is a big issue. I think we need to focus on that. It is a $2 billion a year industry.
Yeah.
We have businesses like Cabot, Ben and Jerry's, and then all of our local cheese producers, and really rely on that.
Just give you a couple, dairy
Oh, yeah.
deserves some attention, again, give you about 10 seconds.
If anybody wants to talk dairy, dairy is going to look different. And I think one of the best people to talk to about that is Guy Schwanier in the Highgate area. He's doing an immense amount of work with diversified agriculture. That's quite frankly just really exciting. I was at a Farmers Watershed Alliance meeting. They were talking about all the exciting, new ways to farm. And I think Vermont's going to look more like that in the future. And Guy Schwanier is the person to talk to.
Okay, down to closing, give you a minute or a little less. Casey, you'd like to go back to Montpelier?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to
Despite all
Montpelier.
these crises and issues.
And I think that's one of the biggest things is we need balance in Montpelier. We need to make sure that we only have 37 Republicans. We need to improve that
In
number
the House,
in the
and what,
House,
7 in
and
the
7 in
Senate?
the Senate. We need to get more balance in there, because we've seen those high tax increases. We've seen those property tax. Every time I go and open a bill, it seems like it goes up every year, and that's a result of the state. I have been a proven leader in the State House. I was elected as Assistant Minority Leader. I'm the ranking member on House Education. Last year, I won 2 national awards. I was the Alex top 50 legislators under 50, and I also, with my work in the Future Caucus, we won the Sharice Eatman Collective Impact Award for our bipartisan work in the legislature with our young legislators. So I think that experience and what I bring to the table is going to be very beneficial for the people of St. Albans.
And Zach, why should folks send you down to Montpelier? Got no more than a minute.
Yeah, I think
Sorry.
Vermont's changing. I think I'm prepared to be a listening leader, someone who's going to reach out, call you back, be responsive. I'm ready to be responsive. It's in my blood. And because Vermont's changing, some folks think you can stop change. Some folks think you can say no to change and it won't happen. I think that we all see and all know deep down that Vermont, because it's changing, the healthier approach is to make the plan, to deal with and steer this change in a positive direction. I'm optimistic about the future of Vermont, and I want to be a voice who can listen to folks at home, but also bring back information, honest information about what's really going on in Montpelier, to give people a chance to navigate an incredibly complicated world. I think change is happening, and I think we need to, and I think Franklin-8's ready for a change.
Okay, on that note, thanks to Zach Scheffler, the Democratic candidate for the Vermont House in the Franklin-8 district, challenging incumbent Republican Casey Toof running for re-election. Thanks for the time, folks.
thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Good,
Richard.
solid discussion. Thanks to my key guy, producer Alan Cunningham, and thanks for watching us here on Northwest Access Television. I'm Richard Cowperthwait. See you next time. Thanks.